Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is VBS Torah study for Shabbos in the end of February, beginning of March, and we're delighted you're with us today. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein from Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California, joined this afternoon by my dear friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Mark, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, my friend.
So this afternoon, this Shabbos, we open up Parshat Ki Tisa, which is a very interesting parsha because it's out of order. That's what this story is all about. It is the story, it continues the story of the creation of the Mishkan, the tabernacle of the desert, this shrine in which God will come with the people Israel on their journey. But smushed into the middle of the story is the story of the creation of the golden calf. Now, I maintain that this story is sort of out of order because Moses climbs Mount Sinai 3 weeks ago, right? 4 weeks ago when we got Parshat Yitro. And what's happened is that this story has been pulled out of the chronology and shoehorned in here between Truma Tetzaveh, the two Torah portions that give us the commandments of how to build the Ark of the Covenant, the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, all the accoutrements of the ark, and then the vestments of the priests. And then the last two Torah portions, which we'll get to next week and the week after, Vayakhel Pekudei, which tell the story of how Moses actually created the thing. In the middle of the story of the creation of the first Jewish institution, the institution of the ark, the institution of the Mishkan, God's dwelling place, in the middle of the story of the creation of all of this, all these symbols, is a story about, well, the abuse of symbols. The people Israel get tired of waiting for Moshe to come down a mountain. They come to Aaron, according to the Torah, Al Aharon. They gang up on him, and they say, make us a god to take us to Canaan, because that guy Moshe, who took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. And Aaron says, take off all the gold that's in your ears and your noses and bring it to me. And he gathers all this gold up and he creates a calf. And then in the story in chapter 32, of course, we have two statements. Aaron says to the people, tomorrow will be a festival to the Lord, which means to Adonai, to the God of Israel. In other words, for Aaron, the calf was like the Mishkan, a place to meet God. God isn't the calf. God, as it were, is above the calf. We know this, by the way, because in archaeology, we have images of a king sitting on a throne with a golden calf as his footstool. The golden calf is the footstool. God is above it. You can't see God, but God is there. In the very same way that at the Mishkan, God will be above the Kruvim, above the angels that rest upon the ark. But the people point to the God that he just made, to the statue, and they said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The clinical definition of idolatry is when you take the symbol and mistake the symbol for what it points to. In literature, it's when you take the metaphor and you take it literally, and you worship the metaphor, you worship the symbol instead of the divinity, the God, or the ideal that it's supposed to point to. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell had a phrase for this. He says it's like a very hungry man who comes into a restaurant and tries to eat the menu. It's when you take the symbol too literally. And that's exactly what it's doing here. In the middle of this story, it is a warning. It is a warning to be very careful with religious symbols, because we tend to sacralize the symbol instead of seeing it as a referent to something that is truly sacred. That's what I think the story's doing here. What do you think it's doing here?
Yeah, I agree. I think that is exactly what it's doing, but it has larger implications for me. And that is, it's about the difference between aesthetics and ethics, the difference between what is beautiful and what is true. Because the real question we should be asking is, what's wrong with idolatry? And your point is exactly right. It confuses, in philosophy, we say the sign with the symbol.
Right.
For people who don't understand exactly what we're talking about, a stop sign is a sign, it's not a symbol. That is, a stop sign is just what it is. It doesn't refer to anything else beside itself. It says stop. Stop. Just like a traffic light, green is go, red is stop, yellow, as George Carlin said, is go faster. And these things are signs. They're just signs. Their whole significance is what they are in themselves. A cross for Christians is not a sign. It points beyond itself in two ways, if you're Christian. First, if you're Catholic, the cross with the body on it, which is called a crucifix, that points to the suffering of Jesus and its importance for Christians as an atonement for sin. And if you're not a Catholic and in your church, there's a plain cross, which is, by the way, how you can tell what kind of church you're in if you look at the crosses in the front. If it's a plain cross, it's symbolic of Jesus's resurrection, which is when he was off the cross, and which is also the gift of Jesus's coming for Christians. So those are symbols. So the question is, does Judaism have any symbols? And the answer I would give with full belief over years of struggling with this is no. And that is the fundamental difference between Christianity and Judaism. There are no symbols in Judaism. The menorah isn't a symbol of anything. It's just basically a light fixture that was in the sacrificial altar is basically the world's largest Weber grill. It's a grill. It's a thing, and it's not a symbol of anything else. Even the Mishkan, even the ark itself, is not a symbol. Because what is it? It's a box. You don't worship the box. The only purpose of the box is to hold what? Words. And words are not symbols. Words are the statement of the truth of life, how you should live your life, the path of life. So to say things simply, the golden calf is the most important part of the Torah because it establishes the difference between symbols and signs, and it shows that in Judaism, there is no worship of symbols, which is what the prohibition of idolatry is all about.
Right. There's no worship of symbols, but we certainly have symbols, don't we?
No,
Really?
no.
How about how about the talit, tzitziot?
Okay, the
Leman
tzitzit,
tizkeru vasita. In the book of Numbers, it says you'll tie these fringes on the corners of your garment. Leman tizkeru, so that you'll remember and do all my mitzvot. That's not a symbol,
no, it's not, even though that's a very good example.
right?
And I can't exactly think about why you're wrong. But basically, I think you're wrong because of this. The
Just because I'm
tallis,
wrong, right?
because you're wrong. Because here's the tallis doesn't point beyond itself. The
Yeah, it
tallis,
points to a mitzvot.
the tallis, no,
tzitziot
the
points
tallis
to,
is the mitzvah.
yeah,
The-
but the tzitziot leman tizkeru. You'll hold these tzitziot and you'll remember all of my mitzvot and do them. It says that's exactly what it says.
yes, exactly. But
That's a symbol.
it is itself the garment. It's the way we dress.
Yeah, but the fringes are symbols. The Ner Tamid in the synagogue is a symbol.
Well, first of all, the Ner
Ner Tamid
Tamid,
is a symbol of the presence of God in this holy place. The Shabbat candles are a symbol. of the beginning of Sabbath and the
Oh,
warmth it brings to a home. These are all symbols. No?
okay. Hang on, hang on.
Maybe I
The-
misunderstood your idea.
No, well, first of all, some of those things are not biblical.
True.
The Shabbos
Well,
candles,
you didn't say biblical. You just said in Judaism we have no symbol.
well, and I would say that
A yard side candle is a symbol, no?
no, the yard site candle is a marker of time.
It's a
Just a
symbol.
marker of time.
All right, go ahead. I
But
see
what
the
the
part I
point
agree. We don't worship symbols. You're right. Of course you're right.
yeah. And so we don't have, here's the point. I thought you would say, because most people say, well, what about the Torah?
I'm about to get to that.
The Torah is not a symbol.
No?
The Torah is a book. The Torah is a book.
But the object, the way we treat the object with a certain degree of reverence, right? Isn't that make it a symbol of God's revelation of truth to the Jewish people?
If that were the case, then you would have to save a Torah over a person. But you have
No,
to save a person over a Torah.
not just that, but there's even times when you're allowed to sell a Torah.
Correct.
But that's the point, that it's a symbol and it has a certain degree of sanctity, but that degree of sanctity is not ultimate. So
Okay.
in a Jewish community, if there's a poor orphan girl who needs a wedding, you sell and there's no other means of support in the community.
You sell the Torah.
Hard to believe, but you sell the Torah to provide her a wedding. If you have a child who needs a teacher, you sell the Torah to obtain a teacher. Now, you don't really sell a Torah for that. You find other means for that. But the point is that it's a degree of sanctity, and there are higher degrees of sanctity.
Yeah,
That
but
young woman's dignity is a higher degree of sanctity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all that. But here's where the dividing line is. What has happened, because what is the motivation of idolatry? Why do people worship idols? The answer is because it's almost impossible to worship an invisible God.
Right.
People need some kind of physical manifestation. The greatest symbol the world has ever created is the cross. And look and you could argue that one of the reasons for the popularity of Christianity is the simplicity of its symbols.
Right.
And
the visibility
yes,
of its God, of its divinity.
precisely right. And what we've done to in a very poor way and an embarrassing way, in my view, though for good reasons, but still it embarrasses me, is walking with the Torah. You walk with the Torah and you kiss and you hug and you kiss and you kiss. No, no, I'm sorry. That makes the Torah into some kind of religious icon that you're kissing like you're passing some icon around.
Right.
It's a book. And the reason that we worship it is because of the words in the book.
That's true.
And that is, of course, true. And that's my point. And that's why we don't have symbols in Judaism.
Right. I once got angry. You should never preach angry. They taught me this in rabbi school, but I violated I was standing on the bima while the Torah was being carried around during a service. And I watched people reaching to kiss the Torah, and they knocked over a kid. They knocked over a child. And I got so upset because that's everything that's wrong.
Yes.
Right? The need to touch the Torah. And I should have done this. I swear I ask forgiveness from the community that's watching. But I stood there and I said to people, if you're kissing the velvet and you're kissing the wood and you're kissing the parchment, but you can't read the words, and you don't know that the words speak about protecting every one of us, most especially protecting a small child, then you're worshiping an idol. You're worshiping an idol.
Good for you.
Right? I said, go learn Hebrew and then understand what you just did. Right?
So that was your last sermon, right?
Yeah, then I left that congregation and moved here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so this is the problem with idolatry, but there's some problems with the calf. The main problem with the calf is that the people who edited the Torah were the descendants of Aaron. They were the priests. And if they had any chance at all,
Hmm.
as redactors, editors of the Torah, to wipe out this story, they would have wiped it out. Because this is the most negative story about Aaron that exists. What they did, because they couldn't wipe it out, because everyone knew this story, is they shoehorned it in exactly like you said, in a place it doesn't belong, and they put it in there, and they surrounded it with all sorts of exculpatory stories about Aaron and how great Aaron was, and his flowering staff that was in the Mishkan, and on and on and on, so that ultimately the priesthood is affirmed, even though this is a story of the failure of Aaron to sustain Judaism. But beyond that, the problem with the golden calf is that God, Moses, and Aaron all violate the exact things that they condemn the people for, and that are condemned in the Ten Commandments. When it says, he's smashing the Ten Commandments. Why? Because the people aren't obeying them. Well, hello, the Ten Commandments say, Lo tirtzach, you shall not murder. Well, guess what they're about to do to all the people who worship the calf? They're going to murder all of them, thousands of them. They're going to murder them. And then it says, the honoring the Shabbos. You can't smash God's words on the Shabbos. That's a violation of the Shabbos. So they violate that. And issues all through the Ten Commandments that they're violating that the people did. So the story has a whole bunch of levels to it. First, it has to get rid of the bad Aaron stories. But on the larger level, which I am most intrigued about, the question leads to, why are there no great Jewish artists?
Before we jump to that, let me just, I want to get to the question in a minute.
Yeah.
I just disagree with one little point of yours. Okay. I think the stories of Aaron are not exculpatory. I think he's punished, and I'll tell you how he's punished.
Okay.
Right? Here's how he's punished. He's made high priest. You know what it means to be high priest? He becomes the symbol. The high priest is a guy who wears a vestment, an outfit, from the tip of his head to the bottom of his toes.
Yeah.
He has no personality. He is not permitted to speak in his own name ever. He is the embodiment of the community and its aspirations, and he loses all of his individuality. He loses his individual will. He loses his role. What's going to happen later in the Torah? We can give it away, I think. His two older sons are going to be killed, performing some kind of rite, and he's told to shut up. He's told not to mourn. I mean, the guy loses his personality because he has to play symbol. The man who manipulated symbols in the wrong way is punished by becoming the symbol.
That's very nice.
That's so I don't think he's
I agree. No, I agree with that.
There.
That's a very nice word.
I don't think it's exculpatory. Now let's take up your role. So the golden calf, the Mishkan that Moses is creating, and he's actually creating it with a man named Bezalel.
Yeah.
And the Torah says that Bezalel was filled with chokhmah, which means wisdom. In this case, it means talent. It means skill, because it's not enough to know what the thing's supposed to look like. You have to have the dexterity to create it and the capacity to create it right and to make it nice.
And Ruach Elohim, don't forget.
Ruach Elohim, right. He has this divine gift of artistic ability. And so the question that you ask is a wonderful question. Why no great Jewish artists?
And the proof of that is there are no great Jewish artists. And if you take a history of art, you can affirm that. I mean,
up until modernity, up until Jacques Lipschitz and Marc Chagall.
Yeah, and we'll talk about Chagall in a minute, I think. But basically, there's no one who's really great. Mondrian, I think, is probably the greatest Jewish artist, but Piet Mondrian. But what are his paintings? They're It's squares with colors in them.
Well, the question is why? Where's our Rembrandt?
All right.
Where's
Exactly.
our Van Gogh? Where's our Michelangelo? Where's our Leonardo?
It's
Why didn't the Jewish community produce artistic geniuses on the level of the Christian community and elsewhere in the world, other communities?
exactly. And especially, why is it that the Christians, artists of the great ones, made art about our Torah and about our Tanakh? I mean, Rembrandt's Jeremiah is my favorite Rembrandt. And obviously Michelangelo's David, and the problem that comes from this week's Parsha, his Moses with the horns on his head. Unbelievable, but they're using our people, our stories, our
Right.
narrative.
So why are there no Jewish
Okay,
artists?
so here's my theory about that. First of all, you've got the Ten Commandments that prohibit engraven images. You shall not make an image of anything on the earth below, the heavens above. It's explicit. Don't make a picture of anything in the world. Because this commandment of the Big Ten, was so assiduously observed, the first Jewish art that's really Jewish art was the only thing that Jewish artists could do, which was to illuminate Passover Haggadahs, that is, to do pictures
And
in
Megillah.
Haggadah.
Yeah.
And the oldest Jewish art is the bird's head Haggadah of Sarajevo.
Mm-hmm.
And in Sarajevo, they found an old, I don't know what it dates from. I think it's 13th, 14th century, but it's late. And in it, all of the characters, Moses, Aaron, the rest, they're regular characters, and there's pictures of them doing all the stuff. But their heads are birds. They're bird heads. And the reason is this isn't a picture of anything that's actually in the world. So it was given a hechsher by the rabbis. Okay, you can do that because there's no such thing as a guy with the bird's head. So the first thing was the commandment. Now, there's great Jewish artists, don't get me wrong, but they're all in non-visual art. It's still the case that the greatest violinists and pianists of the entire history of planet Earth are all Jews, almost all Jews. And so in music, and of course in literature, very big presence for Jews, but not in the visual arts.
Mm-hmm.
The second is one that the second is the obvious economic Marxist reasons, and that is art requires patrons and a leisure class.
Mm-hmm.
That means you need rich people to pay for the art.
You need the Medicis to pay for Michelangelo.
Precisely right. And you need people who have nothing to do but paint. And Jews weren't ever rich enough to have that. And we didn't have patrons. But one of the interesting things that nobody looks at is the Shmirat Shabbat laws. So in order for art to be powerful, it has to be seen. In order for it to be seen, it has to be seen by lots of people basically in houses of worship, which is the only place people gathered, because those were the only communal buildings. Well, in Jewish life, you had to walk to the synagogue, which meant that it was a very narrow, conscribed area where you could draw people to the synagogue. They couldn't be big until the Rothschild synagogue in Paris, and until a few others later when liberal Judaism got going. There never really was a big place for it. So there was no place to display the art because you had to walk to synagogue. The other thing that no one has ever, that I know of, made a mention of, and that is Jewish life in the 6th to 10th century was Jewish life in Muslim countries. And Jewish life in Muslim countries absorbed, obviously, Islamic attitudes. And in Islam, it is prohibited. They're even more restrictive about visual art than we are. There's no Muslim art other than what is artistic for them, which is calligraphy. So if you go into a mosque, you'll see all around
Beautiful. It's
verses
beautiful,
from the Quran.
magnificent, and
Yeah,
geometric designs, right?
Geometric design and calligraphy.
Mhm.
So they would do that. And so Jews simply followed the Islamic tradition of no representative art, and that just like their Islamic patrons and protectors. So that's another reason. But I think the final reason why is that art is about beauty, and beauty is relative. It's, you think this is beautiful, I don't. How do we resolve that? You can't. You can't resolve a dispute about an aesthetic disagreement. You like this artist, I don't. I don't see what the artist is doing. Aesthetic issues, issues of beauty, cannot be resolved definitively. They're more like visual midrash. You can't debate about them. They're just one person's opinion against another. But truth, what is truth? What is just? Yes, yes. There is a true answer to these questions. And truth can be resolved and is resolved. And that's the entire purpose of the Talmud and the response that comes later. So Judaism is about truth, not about beauty. And that's the reason why there are no great Jewish artists. Even the good ones, and Chagall isn't the first rank. He's not Monet, Matisse, Renoir, Rembrandt. He's not at that level, anywhere near that. He, who was born in a Hasidic household in Vitebsk in Belarus,
Right.
he was interested in the life of the place, not the faith of the place. And he was just as interested and fascinated by the Virgin Mary and about the crucified Jesus who appears in some of his work. His stained glass windows adorn both the synagogues at Hadassah Hospital at Ein Kerem and also the Union Church at Pocantico Hills, which is the Rochester, the Roosevelt's private church, really. And so, you know, Chagall isn't really a religious artist. He's an artist who was Jewish. And I think ultimately it's about that. There's a poem by Robert Frost I wanted to conclude with, which is about art. Frost wrote these words: "Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay." And art is about gold, and Judaism is about stuff that stays.
Mazel tov. That was wonderful. I would add just one point to add to that, a corollary.
Yeah.
So if you imagine that the Jewish people, like every culturally sophisticated people, has its aesthetic impulses, and we didn't pour them into plastic arts. There's no great Jewish painters or sculptors of the Middle Ages or the early modern period, up until modernity, up until Chagall and Lipschitz and those guys, which is, by the way, one of the curious effects is that when you have a Jewish museum, that they take you to see spice boxes and Torah covers, but there's no Mona Lisa, and there's no Michelangelo's Moses, and there's no Madonna's and Child. There's no, Botticelli's, So where did those aesthetic impulses go? What did we do with them? And here I would suggest, and tell me if you think I'm right, that because we were a culture which prohibited the creation of images and plastic arts because we were a culture that was always mobile. I mean, imagine if Michelangelo had been Jewish, trying to schlep the David from town to town, right? And because, as you said, we did have a leisure class, but we gave that leisure class a different experience. We made them scholars. We supported scholars. So we didn't make images. What we did was we poured all of our aesthetic impulses into literature, into literature. And while the Talmud took up all of the analytic literature, all the analytic impulses, the rational impulses, the aesthetic impulses got poured into prayer. I would suggest that the Siddur, the prayer book, is our Louvre. Because just like the Louvre, just like any other great national museum, it collects the best of the history of our people. And each one of those prayers is itself a portrait of the world. It was not a plastic portrait, not a painting or a sculpture, but a literary portrait, a perception of reality, a perception of what matters most. It's our Madonna and Child, it's our Rembrandt, but it's put in words, in literary images, in music that came after that, and it's collected by the community, and just like in an art museum, preserved. This, an art museum takes the best of the best of the best. We put the best of the best in the prayer book, and the prayer book is our Louvre.
I love that. I love that. I think
And that's where our aesthetic urges went. So if you want to visit the Jewish Louvre, open a siddur.
Yeah, I would say that I would only add to that, of course, the impulse to music. I mean, you have to look at violinists and pianists and composers and see what they contributed. But yes, I completely.
By the way,
here's the point that I would make about the way that this all comes out of the calf, which is to have some sympathy for these people who are about to get annihilated, which is, wait a second, look at their argument. They say, look, the guy's been gone 40 days. He has no food, he has no water. So give me a break. He's gone, he's dead. So what do we have to worship God? How are we supposed to worship God?
Mm-hmm.
We used to worship God by listening to Moses every day. He'd go into the tent, he'd tell us what God said. Fine. He was there. He was our guide. He was the way we operated Judaism. How are we supposed to operate Judaism without Moses? What do you want from us? And they didn't have what you just added brilliantly, the Siddur. They didn't have a way to worship God without Moses. Right. That was the great innovation of the many innovations of the rabbis and Yavne. That was what saved Judaism, the Siddur. Because the Siddur was, as Heinrich Heine called this about the Torah, a portable fatherland. But what he meant, what I think is more accurate, is that the Siddur was a portable faith, a portable Mishkan. You could, or in your words, a Louvre, a Jewish Louvre, which is a beautiful phrase. Yes, that's the way we operated Judaism. That was our key. That you say you got a car, you need a key. What was our key? We had, without Moses, we had nothing. So they built the calf. They said, okay, this will be our key.
Yeah, but that was Aaron's idea. You needed something to focus attention on so that you could then look toward God.
But was right.
People looked at the symbol and said, the symbol is God. That was the mistake.
But that's already very cerebral. The fact of the matter is, Aaron got the wrong idea. The wrong idea, the right idea was, let's do a prayer book. And the prayer book will tell our stories. And the prayer book will mark our holiday cycles. And the prayer book will provide us with ways to thank God for our blessings.
So here's one more little piece, though, which you said I was going to interrupt you on. I apologize. Music. Here's what you think about music. If Jews import visual images from other faiths, particularly Christianity, which we have such a troubled relationship, it's considered treif. right? That Chaim Potok's novel Asher Lev is all about that. The Hasidic kid who paints a crucifix, right? But we always imported music. In other words, we could import music and it became kosher. So Lewandowski imports German opera or Italian opera, right? Rossi, it takes in Italian opera.
Salamano Rossi.
Salamano Rossi, Lewandowski is German opera. When we were kids, we sang Adon Olam to Simon and Garfunkel songs, and even today, the kids are singing melodies, right? So it's interesting that when you import visual images, those are inappropriate, but the importation of musical themes can be made kosher, can be koshered. And that is okay because all the melodies we sing started out as something else. I mean, very few of these melodies, there are a few melodies that are considered, Messinae, but most of the melodies were German beer drinking songs or
Yes.
Italian opera tunes or some. I remember for a long time when Israel received a shipment or stole a shipment of submarines from France, the Chabad guys in my neighborhood would sing Birkat Hamazon to the Marseillaise. Now I love it. But that the idea is we can import music and make it ours because music isn't visual in that way.
And so I think
it isn't specific in that way.
I would say, look at the contemporary musical scene and the success of the Jewish community, our affluence, our arrival at acceptance in particularly in the West and in America. And you ask yourself, why has the diaspora not produced great Jewish music? I mean, there is some good Jewish music, and my dear friend, may her memory be blessed, Debbie Friedman, did some wonderful synagogue music. But I think you have to look to two guys and ask them, what were they thinking and why didn't they produce more Jewish stuff? Even though one of them produced the greatest Jewish song of the diaspora, which is Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah is the great diaspora song, and it's Jewish in its heart, in its core. It's obscure and beautiful and has been recorded by 100 artists. And the other is Dylan. There hasn't been really a great Jewish song by Dylan. The closest, which isn't Jewish, is, you got to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And, you can make Jewish lessons out of Rolling Stone and some other stuff. And if you look in pop culture, Adam Sandler is doing interesting, they're goofy, but they're Jewish. The Who is Jewish, the Hanukkah song is really Jewish, and he's really Jewish. So it is something I watch, and I mourn that in the diaspora. I mean, remember,
but why then is Israel successful in creating Jewish songs?
Naomi Shemer, right?
Israel's been successful in doing that because Hebrew is there, because the environment of Israel as a cultural majority gives us the opportunity to create in a different way than the diaspora.
Good point. Excellent point. But the problem with Israeli songs, with a few exceptions like Jerusalem of Gold, don't transfer into the American idiom because they're in Hebrew. And
maybe that's our problem. But that's our problem. Part of the problem is we don't speak Hebrew. And if you do it in English, it isn't going to sound the same.
Well, but then there's the argument, wait a minute, you've been here since 1648. It's at least enough time for you to feel comfortable and compose some American English wording Jewish songs.
Okay, so here's a challenge for our listeners.
Dreidel, dreidel, dreidel ain't gonna carry it in the face of the Handel's Messiah.
Here is our challenge, our request of our listeners.
Yeah, write a Jewish song.
No, don't write a tell us if there is a Jewish song that we haven't thought
Okay.
of.
Yeah.
And you want a diaspora Jewish song or an
Yes.
Israeli Jewish?
No, there's a million
A
Jewish songs.
diaspora Jewish song that is
Yeah.
a great, not just a great, that is a great song, a
Yeah.
great Jewish song.
It has to be Jewish and great.
Let's find that out. Thank you, Mark. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom, my friend.